going to be looking at Job chapter 6 and 7. We really covered 6 and started into 7 a bit, so we'll complete that and look at our questions. As I say, it's good to see everybody this morning. And I do like for us to begin with a word of prayer. Let's bow together at this time. May I begin by asking, we're not ready for the questions yet, but the sheet that has 6 and 7 on the front page, which is page number 3, if you'll raise your hand, Bill's already standing up with a stack to give to any that might have need. You know, I said we got into chapter 7 last time. We did, just so far as me speaking of the difference between 6 and 7, but I didn't really cover any of chapter 7 as far as that goes. Let me see here. I'm going the wrong way. There we go. What we saw last time as Job began to speak, Job is aware that all of his friends are in agreement on basic principles. That is that he has sinned greatly. With them, there's no doubt at this point. He has sinned greatly. He needs to acknowledge that. Bildad is the one who has spoken thus far. But Job replies in the plural, and I don't know how they indicated. Maybe their heads were shaking, nodding in agreement. But Job is going to be answering Bildad in chapter 6. And then as we said in chapter 7, you'll notice if you have a translation that capitalizes the personal pronouns, that it's actually addressed to God. When in chapter 7 Job continues to speak, and then we'll be looking at Bildad next, Eliphaz first, and then Bildad, and then Zophar. Job responds, of course, to each one. That's the order there. Where we left off last time was a word picture that Job used. In verse 15 of chapter 6, Job says, "My brothers have dealt deceitfully like a brook, like the streams of the brooks that pass away, which are dark because of the ice, and into which the snow vanishes." Verse 17, "When it is warm, they cease to flow. When it is hot, they vanish from their place." Verse 18, "The paths of their way turn aside, they go nowhere and perish." Well, suppose you're on a caravan and you're looking for water as you're going on your route. Verse 19, "The caravans of Tema look. The travelers of Sheba hope for them." Verse 20, "They are what? They are disappointed because they were confident. They come there and are confused. For now you are nothing. You see terror and are afraid." I want to pause here to develop again, this is poetry, and there are a number of word pictures that are used in the book of Job. And one of these here is the idea of a brook. I'm wondering in verse 15, I'm reading from the New King James translation. As you look with me in verse 15, I'm in Job 6, Job chapter 6 and verse 15. In your translation, does anybody have where that is rendered wadi? Anybody have that? Okay. Now, the definition of a wadi is going to be that sometimes it has water and sometimes it doesn't. And a lot of places in the world really depend upon snowfall for their water supply, and Job incorporates that when you think in terms of verse 16. So you've got ice, you've got snow, it melts, and it runs down. That provides a lot of water, but then as time goes on in the season, then that's gone. So his disappointment with his friends, that's where we are right here. And I wanted to share with you the word picture, and as I said, I know I mentioned this in the closing last time, but it was in the closing. So where we are right here, I'm taking you to the Dead Sea. Now you can just see what you can see right here, which is a sign. But if you were standing where you could, turn around and look, what you'd see, like we're looking here, and as you look here, we're right on the edge of the Dead Sea. Now I'm wondering, here, there you go, that's what I wanted. See, isn't that a neat pointer? And by the way, I want to tell you, the reason we've gone to green is because you can see the red in here just fine. But when we're streaming or somebody's looking and you use a red pointer, they can't see what I'm pointing out. But you can see the green online. That's the reason for that. So, Rocky and Aaron, thanks for that. Were you involved in that, Andrew? Well, thank you for nothing then. Except thanks for all the other things you do. We've got several guys here that anything to do with helping us with technology and electronics, I can call on them, and or they do it before I call on them. And so that's, anyway, this road right here is moving along, and but to the left is the Dead Sea. Now we're going to step up. You can see some water right up here, can't you? You can see some water there. So the name of this brook is Se'elim. Se'elim. And it's a wadi. It's also called Nahal Se'elim. So we go just a little bit further here, and we're at the same place. We've just gone a little bit further, and now we're looking to our west. And as I say, right where this water is running, see, it's running like this, and like where we're standing, but especially more of the wadi. See, you can see a little bit of elevation. That's where the bank is. And so the water's running like that, and where it's going to run off into is the Dead Sea behind us. So this is unusual. You can be in the desert where we are right now. You can be there, I don't know, 350 days in the year maybe. You can be there most of the time. And it's just dry. You'd never see this. It's desert. But here is water now, and it's running in a wadi. But what it's going to do very soon is just be dry. That's the word picture. Now, just a little bit further north, but still right along the Dead Sea, there's another shot that I took to illustrate this. And here again, the signs like this are helpful. That's a different way to spell it, but that's Kidron, just like in your Bible. In John chapter 18, verse 1, for example, it says Jesus crossed the Kidron. Well, the Kidron is the brook in Jerusalem that passes between Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives. That's why John 18:1 says Jesus crossed the Kidron, because he's going to the Mount of Olives to Gethsemane. But see, that the Kidron is going south. It's going south, and it's going east. And what it does is to end up right here It ends up right here, and see, here's a bridge right there, and right in front of you here, that's the Kidron. So that's the path of the wadi, that's the path of the brook. And here in the distance, you can see the Dead Sea. But this right here is the Kidron that's mentioned in the Bible lots of times. It's just that brook, the path that it takes goes from Jerusalem and keeps going. You know, water seeks its lowest level, and it keeps the path, it keeps going down, keeps going down. Did I say west a while ago? It's south and east I meant to say. Did I say west? South. Did I say west? Sorry about that. South and east. Okay, good. That makes me feel better. All over. So from Jerusalem, south and east, and here's where the wadi ends up. You know, it terminates right here. So you see, that's typically what a wadi is, except when it's flowing with water. I'm not trying to belabor the point. It's just, I don't want you to miss the point. Suppose you were just dying of thirst and you think there's water here and your caravan turns aside so that you can go to the water, and you get there and here it is. Job is desperate. He's hanging on by a thread. He needs something from his friends. And they've not helped him at all. They've made his grief so much worse. They've made his pain so much worse. And so, again, that's the word picture. That's the word picture that you have there. So, in verse 24, as we continue, Job makes an appeal to his friends. Now, again, what we've seen so far is the first 7 verses, the heaviness of his suffering. Oh, that my grief could be weighed in scales. It would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Does Job acknowledge that his words, some things he said, have been rash? Does he acknowledge that? Yeah. Verse 3, he says, therefore my words have been rash. So he's acknowledging that. The NET, the New English Translation, says, that is why my words have been wild. The NIV says, no wonder my words have been impetuous. Have you ever said something when you were in great pain and in a state of physical exhaustion that you might not have said under other circumstances? Anybody? That's where Job's at. See, what Job is saying is, I have 10 dead children. I've lost everything. Please understand that it's with all that in mind that my words were rash. That's where Job, and in saying that, really, he's making himself vulnerable. I mean, he's just kind of laying bare his heart for them. So, again, look at verse 14. To him who is afflicted, kindness should be shown by his friend. And even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty, does not mean Job has done that. But Job is saying, sometimes we'd say, for the sake of argument. For the sake of argument, if he's forsaken the Almighty, his friend should try to help him. So anyway, here we are now. Oh yeah, you know, I made the point in verse 11 about his hopelessness. When you reach a state of hopelessness, I'll tell you this, I've noticed that some have shared some posts about suicide recently on your Facebook accounts. And by the way, Job is not talking about suicide. But that just reminds me. It is really when a person reaches a state of hopelessness and is convinced it cannot get better, but doesn't have the strong faith in God that Job had. But oftentimes that sense of hopelessness and despair is just overwhelming when a person takes his own life. And of course, I know there are a lot of factors in that, and I know that God knows the heart. But here, that's what Job is. See, if you got something to hope for, or if you're in a bad state of affairs, but it's going to get better, that's one thing. But if you reach a point where it's hopeless and there's no prospect of it improving, that's where, you see, that's where Job is at this point in time. Hopeless. Okay, but anyway, we're just kind of tagging on to that to see his train of thought. But here in verse 24, when I say he appeals to his friends, he's saying, teach me. Show me my sin. You know, it's one thing to say, well, this has happened to you because you surely must have sinned. And so he's saying, okay, teach me, and I will hold my tongue. Cause me to understand wherein I have erred. It's not enough to say you brought this on yourself. Teach me. So it's kind of a challenge. Teach me and I'll hold my tongue. But in the meantime, verse 25, he says, how forceful are right words, but what does your arguing prove? So it's Job is kind of, he's a bit irritated because his friends are making these general statements. They're saying some platitudes, and much of what they say is true. But again, to make that connection, you have really sinned. That's why you are really suffering. Do you intend to reprove my words and the speeches of a desperate one, which are as wind? By the way, verse 27, you here is plural. This is one of those places I was talking about. Yes, you overwhelm the fatherless, and you undermine your friend. So you see, he's not talking just about Eliphaz. That would be singular. But the friends as a group. You overwhelm the fatherless. What would you think about someone that would take advantage of orphans? Would you say he's a cruel person? See, that's another figure, that's another word picture. It's not that Job is fatherless. He's not saying, you know, my parents have died. That's not the point. Although probably at this point they had. But that's not his real literal point is, you overwhelm the fatherless, you are cruel, like someone that would take advantage of orphans. And he makes another appeal in verse 18. Be pleased to look at me, for I would never lie to your face. It's probably real hard to look at Job right now. But he's appealing to them. Look at me. I would not lie to you. And so, turn now, let there be no injustice. Yes, turn now, my righteousness still stands. Is there injustice on my tongue? Cannot my taste discern the unsavory? You know, we talked about that before. The idea of the palate discerns the taste of food. And he's using that as a word picture that like you taste food and discern if it's savory, if it's palatable or not. Then he's processing their words in that way. And the point of it is their words are not savory. You know, and earlier he had asked about, you know, can you eat the white of an egg without salt, that kind of thing. It's tasteless. So that's Job's speech in chapter 6. Do I have any questions or comments on chapter 6 there? Yes, sir. Job's friends think they are doing him a favor. That would be a correct statement. That is correct. They mean well. Yes, sir.
You see Job in a situation where he's without any earthly option. Without any earthly option. Really, we're in the same situation when it comes to God for forgiveness, because we don't have any options that we can exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we are with God. We have absolutely no options. We can exercise Him. You know, we have to totally depend upon just forgiveness of our sins and the Holy Eternal life. And that's the way He wants it. I mean, that's what He wants it.
Good. Anybody else? Well, let's go on to chapter 7 because Job's speech continues here. So Job is describing his wretchedness, but what we're going to see is, I do believe in verse 7, probably that is addressed to God. But what I'm saying is, for sure, as you get on down, when you start seeing like verse 12 and following all these personal pronouns, we went through some of this last week, that for sure in the paragraph 11 through 21 is addressed to God. So let's see what we have here in chapter 7. Job again is going to be dealing with his suffering, first of all. And again, another word picture is used. Is there not a time of hard service for man on earth? Are not his days like the days of a hired man? Like a servant who earnestly desires the shade, like a hired man who eagerly looks for his wages. And so you think of someone that is just in a state of servitude. He's a servant. He's a day laborer and just hoping to somehow get through the day and finally get some rest. But where he's going with that is that at the end of the day he doesn't have that. He has, like it's equivalent, he's got the hard service. He's got the hard part real well. But he doesn't have the relief at the end of the day. Time is passing. Do you notice this indicator in verse 3 when he says, so I have been allotted what? Months of futility and wearisome nights have been appointed to me. So it doesn't seem that he's saying that, before it happens, that I know there's going to be months of this. You remember, some time has passed. The friends have heard. They made an appointment. They made the trip to see him. They sat 7 days and said nothing. But time is passing. And the word months is used here. Months of futility, wearisome nights. And so here's the way his days go. In verse 4, when I lie down, I say, when shall I arise again, and the night be ended? For I've had my fill of tossing till dawn. Have you ever just wished for daylight, just wished for the night to pass, wished for the dawn of the morning? And he says, every night. That's what my nights are like. And then he describes his health issues here in verse 5. My flesh is caked with worms and dust. My skin is cracked and breaks out afresh. Let's see, these sores. What part of his body were they on? How does it say that? From the crown of his head to the sole of his feet. And so here you have these infectious sores, these ulcerous sores. Sometimes the word boil is used, and that it may be like boil as we know it. You ever had a boil? I mean, how many boils does it take to make you miserable? If you've just had one, you've got a problem. And so you see he's just covered with boils, ulcerous sores, and they're running. That means they're infectious. And if one seals up, then another cracks open. And apparently there are flies around, because what else does he say he's dealing with? Yeah. Some of you will have a translation that says maggots, right? Now, I've said here and there that there are sometimes word pictures that are used. That doesn't mean in poetry that everything's a word picture. In other words, here what he is doing is he is just describing the way it is. In other words, the way his nights are in verse 4 is he can't sleep. The way his body is in verse 5 is covered with these sores, running sores, infectious sores. And because of that kind of a terrible situation, flies take advantage of that. They lay their eggs, and then, of course, there you have it. It could be. It could be. But here is an interesting thing. I've been in Israel, and I've been in just recently in Ireland, where they actually are showing the weaving process. In fact, I know there are places surely that still do it here in the States. It just happens I've been in other places when I see taking from the raw material, taking from wool, where they make that into, is the word twine that I'm looking for. And anyway, then make that into fabric from which they can make clothing, so you see that process. And so the weaver shuttle, back and forth, just going real fast as all that process is done. And so the interesting thing is, on the surface, it almost sounds contradictory. Here he comes to the night, and it's like, will this night ever pass? Will the morning ever come? And it's just one night after another, and months are passing that way. And yet here in the next breath he says in verse 6, my days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle. Then he says, and are spent without hope. I've talked about his hopelessness a while ago. Can both be true? Can it be true that you're suffering, the time seems to pass so slowly, especially at night, when it seems like things are always worse when it's nighttime? And yet you stand back and look at it, and it's like, my life is passing so quickly. Are both true? Isn't that the kind of thing that you have experienced at times, that it seems like, here's something that's on your mind, and it's like, will this thing ever pass? But then you look and you think, wow, how quickly my life is passing. Bobby, what have you said about that 70 and then 80? You ask anybody that has, I think of Brother Fanning, or you think of Sister Elma Bradford. Glenda, did she reach 104, 103? Help me out here. Okay, 103. That's okay. That's what I was thinking. But if you talk to someone like Brother Fanning, or you talk to someone like Sister Bradford, they don't think, this seems so long. It just seems like forever. I told you about Linda and I had been up to Tennessee, where we lived and preached back in the 1970s. And Lee and Della Henson were two of our very good friends and very strong members of the church up there. And it was funny in a sense, but I hadn't seen them in a while. And Lee Henson, Della and Lee Henson, they're both dead now. I did both of their funerals, in fact. But anyway, at the time, Lee Henson said, Brother Leon, my wife and I, we both turned 80. He said, I don't know how this happened. And he was crying. It's like, how in the world did this happen? We've turned 80 years old. Well, that's what James 4 talks about. Our life is both swiftly passing like the vapor that appears in the morning. This morning, did you notice did you get up early, Raymond, 4:30? Is that how, when it got light enough for you could see, did you see all that fog? But look at it now. Well, you don't look at it now. I'll look at it for you. Kip can see it there. It's just clear. You saw the sunshine driving over here. Where did all that go? And he's saying your life is like that, the vapor that passes away. And so what James is saying is, even if we live, that, of course, he doesn't mention there the 70. That's Moses in Psalm 90, where that wording is found. But James's point would be, even if we live a long, full lifetime, it's still brief. But James's point is, we have no assurance that we will be here tomorrow. Therefore, the urgency of doing God's will today and now while we have time and opportunity. But you see, Job is experiencing both of those on the surface contradictory emotions, but they're really not. I mean, that's just part of life. And this kind of suffering is not part of everybody's life. But the ability to think that time is passing very slowly, will this night ever pass? And yet you stand back and look and see your life is getting by so quickly. But that part, my days are without hope. Again, that's so sad to hear him say that at this point. But he's just expressing how he feels. But again, I do think that in verse 7, when he says, "Oh, remember that my life is but a breath," I don't know that he's trying to appeal so much to his friends, especially because we know in the verses that are coming up, we know he's talking to God, and it would seem perhaps verse 7 is addressed to God as well. But what's going to happen is, if you read these next few verses, like you're reading Ecclesiastes, who remembers what is the thrust of Ecclesiastes? Life under the sun, from the perspective of this earth. And of course, where Solomon is going is, we have a relationship with the one who made the sun and everything else, and then we have purpose. But he talks about a lot of things, the futility of life, if you're just looking at what happens here on this earth and as if that's all there is to it. Okay. Right here, Job is looking at it like Ecclesiastes does, as far as just saying what happens in this life on earth. My eye will never again see good. Well, he was wrong about that. That's the way he felt, though. The eye of him who sees me will see me no more. While your eyes are upon me, I shall no longer be. As the cloud disappears, see, that's just like James. As the cloud disappears and vanishes away, so he who goes down to the grave will not come up. He shall never return to his house, nor shall his place know him anymore. Now, it would be a real misuse of the passage here to say that you'd use this verse to show there's no life after life here on earth, that there's no life beyond the grave. Because, first of all, you'd be ignoring what he is saying, and secondly, that view would be contradicting other plain passages. Of course, that does not stop people like the Jehovah's Witnesses from abusing passages like this. But when you think about it, just think about what he is saying as far as your place, your house, your land. When you die, what happens with all that? Do you leave it all behind? When you die, are you going to come back to that place? You're going to come back and work that land and come back to that house you lived here on earth? So that's what he's saying, that life will be over. There won't be any coming back.
Is it reasonable to say also that at this point, full revelation is not in play to Job's idea of what the resurrection might be about, and the hope that that could give even in these circumstances? I don't see how he can try to grasp that.
I do believe that's right. Revelation is progressive. It's just that at this point, what he's looking at, I do believe, is the life on the earth. But that's right. The fullness of revelation about the resurrection and so many other things has not been given because, again, we're looking at a very early point where Job is living and enduring these things. I think that's a valid point.
If he had some understanding of the resurrection, it might make this more terrible because it is so limited.
I think you're right. I think that's a valid point. And so he continues, I will not restrain my mouth. So what have we said here thus far? The brevity of life is the point right here, the brevity of this life. And he views God really as the watcher of men. Again, this is being addressed to God as he complains. In verse 12, am I a sea or a sea serpent that you set a guard over me? When I say my bed will comfort me, my couch will ease my complaint, then you scare me with dreams and terrify me with visions. Now, we've already said before he had trouble going to sleep at night. But when he does go to sleep, what does he have? Nightmares. You know, there are dreams, and then there are nightmares. You know, a nightmare, have you ever had this? It can have the impact, even though you wake up and you know it's a dream, it can make you feel bad all that day. Have you ever had that happen? I mean, just kind of that, just a bad feeling, and it was just a dream. And so in verse 15, my soul chooses strangling and death rather than my body. But again, he never talks about ending it himself. Even though it saddens me to read in verse 16, I loathe my life. I would not live forever. Let me alone. My days are but a breath. Here again, I don't know of anybody that's ever suffered what Job did. And it kind of robs someone of their credibility. If I'm reading after them, and I've got a lot of good references, but if I'm reading after someone and he comes along like, well, you know, we can all relate to this. We all have things like this. It's about like I feel when somebody says, well, you know, we all have our Gethsemanes. Do you believe that? Do you believe we have what Jesus had when he went to the Garden of Gethsemane? That's a failure to appreciate, you know, what's going on here. But I can think of some things that remind me of this. There was a car accident. I had not been preaching a long time when this happened, but there was an automobile accident when the husband was not in the car, but the wife and 2 children were in the car. And the wife and the daughter were killed instantly. The son suffered such trauma and brain damage that he lingered another day before he died. So I was asked to conduct that funeral. So here is a man that, you know, a few days before had a wife and 2 children. And so I'm sure many of you who have lived long enough have seen this. Have you been to a funeral where there's 2 coffins? Have any of you ever done that? 2 coffins there at the same time? I mean, you don't see that every day. So here I conduct services with the wife and daughter, and the next day for his son. In fact, the first funeral I ever conducted a few years before that, before I was doing full-time work, was for a mother and daughter, and the daughter was full term in her pregnancy. But you see, Job had 10 coffins. Not just 2, not just 3. There were 10 coffins. And all of his wealth and his health and the support of his wife. That's what Satan has inflicted him with. Will a man serve God for naught? Skin for skin. And it's not like God says, well, you know, I'm kind of bored up here in heaven. I just want to have a little contest to see what will happen. That's not the point. But you think of, even though how much Job suffered, how many people he has blessed. When you stay with him through the end of the book and see what happens, and you really see that the nature of God and our relationship with him is such that we serve him because of who he is. You could take away every tangible reason, your family, your wealth, your health, every reason on earth, every blessing on earth, every visible, tangible reason, and God is just as worthy of our service and of our praise as when we're basking with all kinds of blessings. And so he has been a source of instruction to countless millions of people because he persevered. Like James would say, you've heard of the patience of Job. You've seen the end intended by the Lord. And so, you know, we want to bear that in mind as we read through his struggles with this. Well, let's continue. But don't you find that sad in verse 16? I loathe my life.
Leon?
Yes, yes, sir.
The New American Standard says I waste away.
Yeah, I see that. I've got that actually in my notes. I waste away. I will not live forever. But so you've got that rendering. The King James says, I loathe it. The NET says, I loathe it. The NIV says, I despise my life. So yeah, thank you for reminding me of that. I did have that in my notes, but I was not remembering that. But the point of it is, he doesn't have any desire to live any longer. That point has been reached. And so this is addressed to God. What is man that you should magnify him, that you should set your heart on him? These kind of questions are asked by David in Psalm 8 when he says, what is man that you're mindful of him? But that's in a good way to say, you are so, here's my word that's misused, Raymond, but you are so awesome. I'm so insignificant. So he's praising God because, you are mindful of man in a good way. But here, Job is saying, what is man that you should magnify him, that you should set his heart on him, that you should visit him every morning, you test him every morning? How long will you not look away from me and let me alone till I swallow my saliva? So it's like, here he is again saying, I'm so insignificant, but because I'm so insignificant, why would you take such an interest in me to do this? I don't even have time to swallow my spit. I mean, that's really what he's saying. Have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target so that I'm a burden to myself? I was talking with Aaron this past Thursday morning. We were talking together, studying, praying. You don't mind if I say that, do you? Too bad if you do. But I was making the point to him. I was asking, do you read Job aloud? The scripture is intended to be read aloud. And you don't get the force of these words if you read them silently. You really get the force of what's being said. Now, if your wife thinks you're going crazy and talking to yourself, just say, no, I'm doing what Leon said. I'm reading the scripture aloud. So you have my permission. But why then do you not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? For now I will lie down in the dust, and you will seek me diligently, but I will be no longer. So it's just, again, Job knows he's not sinless, but he knows he loves God, he trusts God, he's not turned away from God, and yet he's suffering so tremendously. And it's like, why would you take such an interest in me that you would bring these things about? And if there's sin, why will you not pardon my sin? So that's, again, that's the struggle that he's having at this time. Now, questions or comments? Let's look at our questions. And I'm prepared to do chapter 8. Should we have time, I think we'll just have to see how that goes. There we go. All right, so let's see. Sue Freeman took the last one. Brother Freeman, are you missing Sue?
Sure.
Are you missing your wife?
Yeah.
Why did I have to ask you that twice? Well, I mean, inquiring minds want to know. It occurred to me. I just wondered. I just asked a question. Well, I just wondered. I left my pen upstairs. Can you believe that? Okay, Keith, would you get us started? Wait just a minute. Have you taken one yet, Joan? So we need to go to Joan, and then we'll move back that way. Question number 1, please. Number 2. And Vicki, number 3. And we'll just move right along. Number 4. Okay, number 5. Okay, so to put that in question form, we call that a rhetorical question, which means what? The answer is self-evident. To say, is my strength the strength of stones? Well, no. His strength is gone. Okay, next. What are we, number 6? Okay. Could I ask you all to speak up just a little bit louder, if you would, so everyone can hear? I can hear just fine, but some of these people are straining. Number 7 is next.
What were Job's friends like? Well, he used a lot of descriptions and everything that resolved after the dust settled and everything. It was a miserable company.
Yeah, and in these verses, what would be the one word to describe that word picture we talked about? They're like a what? They're deceitful, like a what? A wadi. That's the word picture in these verses. So, yeah, they're miserable comforters, they're deceitful, but that's the word picture. When I'm asking what were they like, I'm asking what is he comparing them to. The answer is wadi, a dry wadi. Or a wadi that dries up and doesn't have water when you need it. Number 8 is next.
Did he say that he had asked his friends for anything in his time of trouble? No.
Number 9.
Did he ask them to show him bread he had there? Yes.
And number 10.
What does Job say about the servant and the hireling? That his days are like a hired man, earnestly desiring and shame and looking for his wages.
Number 11. Number 12.
What kind of symptoms was Job experiencing in describing his flesh capable of worms and justice?
And number 13. Swifter than a what? A weaver's shuttle. There's another word picture. We're up to the front here, Brady, with number 14.
What did Job say about man who goes down to the grave, not seeking his
Okay. Aaron, did I get everybody on that back row back there? Okay, so Thomas, number 15 is next.
Did he mention dreams and visions which terrified? Yes.
And number 16?
What state of mind is Job expressed in 17 and 16? I love my life.
And number 17.
What kind of questions does Job ask about God's dealings with man? What is man that you set heart on him, didn't visit him, and test him in every moment?
And number 18.
Job's suffering was a result of sin. What do you think God should do? Pardon him and take him.
Thank you. Now, what I've got, the back side of that sheet, has questions on 8 and 9. And what I've got right here is another sheet, which is chapter 10 through 14. So if I could have about 4 of you guys, Hank, to pass these out, please. Thank you very much, everybody.